allies, and then of course preventing Iran from ever obtaining a nuclear weapon. The full reopening of the Strait is something the administration is working towards, but the core objectives of the operation have been clearly defined for the American people by the Commander-in-Chief. Garrett.
The President posted this morning about his threat that on leaving Iran, he said we might be blowing up and completely obliterating all of their electric generating plants, oil wells, Harg Island, and possibly all desalinization plants. Under international law, striking civilian infrastructure like that is generally prohibited. Why is the President threatening what would amount to potentially a war crime with the U.S. military? And how do you square that with the administration repeatedly saying that the U.S. does not target civilians?
Look, the President has made it quite clear to the Iranian regime at this moment in time, as evidenced by the statement that you just read, that their best move is to make a deal, or else the United States Armed Forces has capabilities beyond their wildest imagination, and the President is not afraid to use them. That's not what I said, Garrett, and you're saying the word potential for a reason, because I'm sure some experts are telling you that in your ear to try to ask me that question. Of course, this administration and the United States Armed Forces will always act within the confines of the law. But with respect to achieving the full objectives of Operation Epic Fury, President Trump is going to move forward unabated, and he expects the Iranian regime to make a deal with the administration.
To that end, which of those objectives would destroying a desalinization plant most help?
Haley, go ahead.
Thanks, Caroline. I want to follow up on Iran. When you're describing that the Iranians you're in contact with are being more reasonable this time around in discussions, what specifically are you hearing that is leading you to that conclusion, and how are you defining what's reasonable versus unreasonable in that regard?
I'm not going to detail the private and sensitive conversations that are taking place between the United States and Iran right now.
But generally speaking?
Generally speaking, the President gave you the answer. What we're hearing from them is more reasonable. They have agreed to some of the points the United States laid out, as the President said last night aboard Air Force One. But again, as for the specifics, as these negotiations are ongoing, we're not going to broadcast them to the world unless the President chooses to do so, which he has the full right to do as the leader of the free world.
Caroline. On Cuba, the President threatened to tariff any country that would send oil to Cuba, but now the U.S. is letting this Russian tanker to Cuba. Is this a policy change, or is he willing to let more tankers into Cuba now?
This is not a policy change. There has not been a formal change in sanction policy. As the President said last night, we allowed this ship to reach Cuba in order to provide humanitarian needs to the Cuban people. These decisions are being made on a case-by-case basis. And as the administration has said, Cuba's non-functional economy cannot be fixed unless they undergo dramatic political and leadership change. But there has been no formal change with respect to sanction policy.
So you could expect more tankers to go to Cuba?
Again, these decisions are being made on a case-by-case basis right now.
Thanks, Caroline. You addressed this a little bit in the opening, but just to follow up, because Americans are sort of seeing these conflicting messages between the United States and Iran. I know the President insists that negotiations are underway. As you just mentioned, he's also said that Iran has agreed to most of the 15 points. We just heard from Iran again. They're saying no negotiations are taking place. They're calling the proposal excessive, unrealistic. So how do you square that? How do you explain that discrepancy between the two?
I think the American people are smart enough not to take the word of a terrorist regime that has chanted death to America for 47 years at their word. And I hope the journalists in this room are wise enough not to take an Iranian regime that has repeatedly lied about our country, about our values, about everyone in this room, frankly, for nearly 5 decades. So I think the American public are smart enough to understand that.
And just to follow up on the objectives, you've laid them out, but I know the President has set a deadline for April 6th in just 1 week. What does the President need to see to not move forward with those strikes by April 6th?
Well, I think he said it in his Truth Social post this morning. He wants to see a deal over the next 10 days. That timeline is waning, several days left, and we'll see. I won't get ahead of it. We'll see what happens in the end of the 10-day period.
Caroline, thank you. One on Iran, one on the shutdown. The President continues to say the U.S. is in conversations with a more reasonable regime, but there are now hundreds of U.S. Special Operations Forces, including Navy SEALs and Army Rangers in the Middle East, as well as thousands of other troops already deployed. So is he trying to end or intensify the conflict?
President is focused on achieving the objectives of Operation Epic Fury. With respect to forces that are on the ground in the Middle East, it's the job of the Pentagon to create maximum optionality for the Commander-in-Chief. It does not mean the President has made any additional decisions. Again, he remains focused on ensuring that the Pentagon continues to achieve the objectives of the operation that was launched 30 days ago, and we're well on our way to doing that.
So if an